Well, it's been terrific. I mean, this is home for me. As much as I enjoyed 70 and sunny every day in LA at UCLA, there's nothing like being home. When I go out and I'm recruiting the guys here in Indiana, it's like I know every high school coach, and getting to know all the players. But it's home, and not only for me but for my wife, and it's just terrific.
Okay. How easy of a decision was it to say, hey, yeah, absolutely,
Well, it was pretty easy in the fact that I wanted to see family, but I really enjoyed working with Steve Alford, working with our players at UCLA. That's the relationships there is what made it a little bit difficult, but obviously getting a chance to come home, it was especially with Archie Miller. I think he's the finest young coach in the game today. So to be able to lock arms with him made it an easier decision. Yes.
And the ability to successfully recruit in-state. Obviously, you have a lot of connections, but in your mind, what is the key that Indiana gets the in-state players it wants to get?
Well, one, I think it starts with the relationships. I'm sure everybody that speaks about recruiting, it starts there. And one thing that makes Indiana a bit easier to do that with is the high school coaches still have influence. And you have high school coaches that, for the most part across the state of Indiana, care about their players as people. And you don't have so many other people associated with the player as you might have in LA, for example. And so I think being able to have relationships with not only the player and the family, but the high school coach is vital here in this state. And that's what makes this a great state to recruit, from my perspective. So I think recruiting the state of Indiana is going to be important. We just at UCLA just got through recruiting Chris Wilkes, and you're working with Doug Mitchell, you're working with the family, maybe the AAU program a little, but it's a good recruit. It's a good way to recruit, and that makes the state of Indiana a little bit different. And hopefully it's going to prove fruitful for us, because obviously the lifeblood of Indiana basketball since I've been around has been built with a foundation of Indiana high school basketball players that come to Indiana and come to Bloomington.
You've been around the state a little bit already since being on the job. What's the reaction you're getting from high school coaches, AAU programs on the new staff and Archie taking over?
Well, it's been I've been real flattered. Just everybody I've seen is welcome home, and so that's been nice. And I don't know if early in my career all these high school coaches were beating me when I was at Logansport and Western Boone and all them, and early at Park Tudor. So I don't know if they're welcome home because of that, but no, it's been great. And I think the reaction from everybody that I've run across is so favorable relative to Coach Miller, because they see him as, hey, this is kind of a guy that's cut of the Indiana high school basketball cloth. In other words, a guy that loves basketball, that wants to get in there and sweat in the gym. So everybody that I've run into has been super favorable about Coach Miller, and I've just been so flattered that, hey, welcome home, Coach.
Coach, regarding those relationships, you've been on both sides, both as a college coach and a high school coach. What's the key to creating authentic relationships on both sides there?
Well, I think it's going to ultimately boil down to how well do you take care of the players. Obviously you've got to coach them well. They want to see that they do improve. I think that's one of the things. Is he going to get better? Is he going to have a good experience? Is he going to be treated well? That's what I look for when I was a high school coach is, hey, is he going to be treated well? Is he going to have an opportunity here? And, and I think ultimately the product is going to be what's going to sell beyond that. After we get a few years in and you start getting you're coaching the bulk of your team or players that you've coached, then it's going to be the product. Okay, it's one thing to say it now, but I think the one thing that I looked at, and I think the other high school coaches in Indiana are going to be like, okay, what's the product? It's one thing to talk about it. Now let's see the proof of it. And I think that's down the line. It's going to be what are you producing, and how are you treating our players in the process?
Mike, how did your experience at UCLA make you a better coach and maybe a better recruiter?
Well, for me, getting a chance to work with somebody different. I had worked with John Calipari, obviously, at UMass, the Nets, and then at University of Memphis. It gave me a chance to really kind of get a different system, and that was with Steve Alford, being able to get the old IU motion, so to speak, learning that from an offensive perspective. I think that was very helpful to just see a different way of doing things. And then also it kind of expanded the recruiting base and just seeing how, getting a chance to meet more people from coast to coast now. I obviously did a lot of the East stuff when I was at UMass and a little bit at Wright State as a head coach, but then extending it all the way to California. I think, at Indiana you have you have the opportunity to recruit coast to coast because of the name recognition. Obviously, the bulk of it's going to be here in Indiana, but again, I think is just getting a chance to learn another system, another way of doing things, and then also to expand the recruiting base.
Terry?
You said sunny and 70. I think it's more like you don't have In-N-Out Burger anymore, but you don't have to drive on the 405 either. So,
that is right.
But I mean, talk about the different mindset maybe as a coach for how you would coach kids in the Pac-12 compared to how you coach them in the Big Ten. Well,
one, I think how you coach them, I think, is going to be pretty consistent. You've got to stay true to who you are, and I'm not going to be a different Ed. How I'm going to coach guys there as here, but I think the style of play is a little bit different. I mean, the Pac-12 is a lot more up and down. It's going to be a lot more free-flowingness traditionally than the Big Ten. So the Big Ten, you're going to have to be a lot more physical than probably the Pac-12 has been. So I think that's the one adjustment. You're going to have to, it's going to be a tougher, more grinded-out type game traditionally than the Pac-12. So that would be the one change that I would see just from a coaching style perspective. But I think Coach Miller, that's how he coaches. So he's not going to have any adjustment.
Chris, what was the extent of your previous relationship or knowledge of Coach Miller and then John Calipari having a relation to the family? Did that play a factor for you?
Well, it did. Well, I guess my relationship with Archie began a long time ago. I was the best man in Sean Miller's wedding, quite a few years ago. So now he was pretty young at the time, but kind of how I really got my respect for Arch was, I guess it was my first year at UCLA. In the NCAA tournament, I had the Dayton Scout. We played Florida, they played Stanford, and so I had the Dayton Scout. Now, they advanced, we didn't, so that scouting report ended up in the trash. Same thing happened this year, similar thing happened this year. I had the Dayton Scout in the Anaheim, the John Wooden tournament in Anaheim, so I had the Dayton Scout again. And so both times, as I scouted them, I was like, wow, they do a terrific job. And so I was very, very impressed with them, 4 years ago and again this past season. And then knowing Sean Miller, coaching against him at Arizona, there's a lot of similarities in how the two play. So I think I just had a great deal of respect from scouting his teams. I also had the Arizona scout each year too, so I saw his brother. And then Calipari is, he's once you work for Cal, you always work for him at some level. So he talked to me afterwards more than anything. I think he probably did some things behind the scenes with Brew and I. So, but Coach Cal's kind of, if you're with him, you're with him, and he's with you. That's not a more loyal guy in the business than John Calipari.
Zach? Just kind of piggyback on a couple earlier questions, and maybe the answer is no, but you talked about at UCLA, you've obviously been at Memphis when there's a lot of success there. At a program where there is kind of, I guess, a high level of achievement expected, a lot of interest and attention, is an assistant's role any different?
I think it kind of comes back to what the head coach wants. I've been fortunate with Coach Alford that he gave me great, almost free reign from a skill development perspective to, hey, go run with it, And then with Coach Cal, you have certain things that he's going to allow you to do. I've been fortunate to be with guys that let you run with different things. And so I've been at programs that have been pretty successful. When I got to UMass, they had everything was rolling. We went to the Final Four at Memphis. It was kind of a little bit of a build, but it had a lot of tradition. UCLA, obviously, every time I left the gym, I had to look at the John Wooden statue. So there's a lot of pressure when you go there, but the bottom line is you've got to do your very best to coach these players like you'd want your son coached. And I think that's what I'm going to try to do every day here at Indiana. Same thing I tried to do at UCLA and before then.
Jeff, you've obviously really done a lot with skill development, going back to even Champions Academy. You worked with, Odin Conley, other guys who went to the draft. Kind of, how important is skill development going to be in your specific role here? How do you see that part specifically playing out?
Well, one of the reasons, again, I was interested in the job is that I knew the priority that Coach Miller places on getting his players better and the skill development. And so that's one of the reasons that made this job interesting, because you have a coach that puts a premium on taking the guys that we have and making them better. Some are just, okay, now it's all about X's and O's. Here it's about improving them as players on the court and off the court. So, that's what I want to do. That's what I think, hopefully is one of my biggest strengths that I can bring to the table. I'm certainly going to do everything in my power to help these guys get better. I've worked with some of them already. Of course, they were about this big when I was working with them. But so I'm fired up. I really enjoyed the couple workouts that I've got to be with these players. And they certainly have a great work ethic. I think that's, if you kind of throw in some of the generalities that we've spoken about earlier, these kids know how to work, and they've learned it from their Champions Academies or their, whatever they came up in, and their high school coaches, and then even the foundation that's been laid in these players. They work here, and so that was really really fun to be part of that.
Quick follow-up, who were some of the guys who you worked with when they were little?
Oh, well, Colin Hartman was one. He's one of the guys that was coming in, the McRoberts a little bit, and so some of those guys got a chance to work with them when they were, junior high, and coached against like Colin. And when I was at Park Tudor, he was at Cathedral, so got a chance to coach against some of them as well.
Sure. What did you learn from working extensively with Coach Calipari for a good portion of your career? How did he shape your approach to your career?
Well, I think the biggest thing I gleaned from Coach Cal is, one, just how hard he got them to work. He knew the buttons to push. He knew how to push them, how to just maximize them. And I think if you see Coach Calipari's teams, you see how hard they play. And then also sitting in recruiting visits with Coach Cal, that you see his charisma, you see how he connects with players regardless of their where they're from, whether it's a kid in the South or the North or rich or poor. He has an incredible ability to get right to connect with them. So I think from the extent of how hard he gets them to play to how he connects with them in recruiting, and then also to be able to challenge players the way he has over the years, but yet at the end of the day, he knows that he cares about them. Terry?
I was just going to say, so when Archie gets the job, can you just talk about the process and how quickly you were on the radar, or did he reach out? Did you reach out? How did that go?
Well, it was actually through Sean Miller. He gave me a call, and we just kind of small talked, which isn't necessarily unusual. We were just kind of small talking about, lamenting about the testing of the waters and all that stuff that we're both dealing with at UCLA and Arizona. So we're just kind of talking. He says, "Okay, now the real reason I'm calling here, kind of a go-between here. I know your roots in the Midwest and in Indiana, and would you be interested in talking to my brother, about the Indiana?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so he kind of put us together. We spoke that night, and we spoke the next night, and it was done.